Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's meeting of Cabinet. I need to commence this meeting with the nominations for a chair for the meeting in the absence of the Leader of the Council and the Deputy Leader of the Council. So please could I take some nominations to be the chair of the meeting?
Yeah, I move Councillor Sarah Russell.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Second that.
Thank you. All those you're all in favour? Yes. Okay. Councillor Russell is appointed as chair for this evening's meeting. Thank you. In case there's any queries around quoracy of the meeting, quoracy for Cabinet members is 5. If we fall below 5, the meeting would have to be suspended. So the quoracy, just for confirmation, is 5.
Okay, good evening everybody. Thank you for your attendance tonight at this Cabinet meeting. We do have a number of apologies. We have apologies from Councillors Banwaite, Repton and Hussain, and Councillor Rawson is running slightly late. Are there any other apologies from the floor, please? Okay, late items, there is one. Item 19, I believe, has an addendum, which should be provided for you. Are there any others? Okay. Receipt of petitions, there are none. Identification of urgent items to which call-in will not apply, there are none. Do we have any declarations of interest, please? Thank you. Can we agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of June? Do we agree those as a true record? Thank you. Item 7 is the recommendations from Corporate Scrutiny and Governance Board, which was held last night. As is custom in these meetings now, I will take those an agenda item at a time to correspond with the relevant document on the agenda. Okay, item 8, service delivery model for the Council's care homes and day centres. Andy, I think you're presenting this.
Thank you, Chair. This report provides a summary of the consultation exercise regarding the future delivery model for the Council's in-house care homes and day centres. The Council's position was very clear throughout the consultation that because of the budgetary position facing the Council and given that many of our homes and centres require a programme of modernisation and improvement, the proposal is that the Council looks for someone else to take over and run 5 of the 7 care homes and all 3 remaining day centres. Overall, there was a good level of engagement in the consultation process, particularly from users where they have capacity, carers, family members and other stakeholders. The key messages from the consultation are a preference to keep services open, issues raised around the continuity of care, concern there could be a fall in the standards of care if another provider takes over the running of the homes or centres, and ensuring a smooth transition. An equality impact assessment has been done. This is an iterative assessment and we will continue to update it as we move through the processes subject to Cabinet agreement today. Currently the view is that the proposals will not have any impact on the 10 protected characteristics or any negative impact on any of the equality groups identified. The next step proposed in the paper is to undertake a soft market testing exercise in order to determine whether or not an alternative provider or providers can be identified. We know there's interest. During the consultation, 4 existing providers in relation to care homes and 8 in relation to day centres expressed an interest, so the prognosis is quite good. Any interested party would need to sign a confidentiality disclosure notice. So the next step, in line with the recommendations, is to receive the consultation and to move to a soft market testing exercise.
Thank you, Andy. Are there any questions or comments on that, please? We can do our best, my love.
Thank you.
No, we can't, sorry. I'll do my best. My voice usually does carry quite well, but if you're struggling to hear me, I do apologise, but unfortunately there's not much else we can do with the sound. So apologies for that. Are there any questions or comments from the floor, please? Philip.
In the report, it says that the organisations looking to take over the 4.6, the care homes, were looking for more detailed information to establish whether the ideas were viable and affordable. And obviously, I assume that with the soft marking testing, it should be possible to present that information to them. And so I was just checking, is there any idea for when that information would be able to get to them? Because the sooner, I guess, the better for their point of view.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Philip. That was an issue raised at scrutiny last night, and that will absolutely be the focus of the soft market testing. What we weren't able to do as part of the consultation was start to give providers that might have an interest any of the information for risk of preempting the outcome of the consultation. So that's absolutely going to be the detail of the information that will be provided as we do the soft market testing.
Councillor Bolton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Whilst this report is obviously of concern, and I thank Andy Smith for delivering the report, this is another result of our Conservative government cuts. We're having to make changes to local government, even though we don't want to as a council, but we're having to look at delivering differently, and this is part of the situation we're in. It is not something we want to do as a Labour council, but it's something we've got to do methodically and practically. We want to look at the good standards and quality care that our existing constituents and people in Derby get. We are looking to the local groups and voluntary sector to deliver these services, not go out to privatisation. But I repeat again, this is a consequence of government cuts, not something that we want to do.
Councillor Skelton.
Thank you. I first of all would like to say very well done on the front loading, if you like, of consultation, so that the people who are going to be affected will actually be able to have some say in steering the direction which the council goes in, and that's something to be very much applauded, and I hope that it will be spread out to other areas of the council as well. Also, I would like to just comment on what Councillor Bolton has said. I think the fact that care homes are in the situation they are, particularly because most, if not all of them, the figures that I've got, have vacancy rates of between 25 and 50%. That is actually a consequence of the success of extra care that this council has been doing over the past number of years. Thank you.
Councillor Holmes, please.
Thank you, Chair. What assurances or what plan does the council have to transition to more modern facilities? I'll give you an example of what our vision was a few years ago, to transition from the traditional care homes to extra care or more modern facilities, more fit for purpose. One of my concerns would be that if the older buildings, which I think is recognised need significant improvement, are being retained, how does the council perceive modern facilities being provided in those facilities in the future?
Well, there have been a number of extra care facilities opened in Derby over the last 18 months to 2 years. The philosophical approach in people services is to try and prevent older people and people with learning disabilities from requiring residential care, and to try and work within the communities to look for alternative options and alternative packages, because we think that can lead to better outcomes. What we need to see for the soft market testing exercise is what interest there is in the market in terms of taking on the day centres and the care homes, and what options and forms of delivery and ways of working are put forward by interested parties, and then we need to look at that. We need to ensure that we listen to residents in terms of what's come out of the consultation in relation to the things they're worried about around continuity of care and transfer, but we need to see what provider or providers have to put forward as part of the next phase, and then that would be subject to a further report to Cabinet in the autumn.
Thank you. Any further questions or contributions, please? Okay, I move the report. Can I get agreement from Cabinet, please? There are no recommendations from scrutiny on this item. Thank you. Okay, item 9, compulsory acquisition of empty homes. Ian, I believe you're going to present this item.
Thank you, Chair. This report seeks approval to commence compulsory purchase proceedings in relation to 5 homes, empty homes in the city. All of these homes have been empty for a minimum of 3 years and will have been subject to complaints from local residents as well. When the properties are brought back into use, they will reduce any unsightly appearance, they reduce the risk of crime and antisocial behaviour at those properties, and they will contribute towards New Homes Bonus for the council. We will consider any of the homes that we do finally acquire through this process to be retained as council accommodation. And from past experience, for every 5 or so properties where we get a cabinet resolution to go for compulsory purchase proceedings, typically only 2 or 3 will go the whole way. Just the fact of a cabinet resolution is often enough to persuade the owners of those properties that the council are serious and they will take the necessary action themselves. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. I know we do some very good work in this area, so keep it up. Any questions or contributions from the floor, please? No, thank you. Can we put the recommendations to Cabinet as printed, please? Again, no recommendations from scrutiny on this item. Thank you. Item 10 is the A52 Wyvern Transport Improvement Scheme, improved scheme costs. Tim?
Thank you, Chair. Members will be familiar with this scheme, which has been here a number of times. The report sets out some more detail of the financial cost, but that is in the later part of the meeting. So for now, members are just asked to note the contents of this report.
Are there any questions or... Yes, Councillor Holmes, please.
Thank you, Chair. 4.5, it talks about the revised costs, including the estimate for infrastructure for revised speed limit, which I think everybody agrees is probably a good option for the road to improve safety. But on the safety, I think it would be useful to understand a little bit more about the background to safety measures being put into place, specifically the speed limit. Accident stats to back up the investment by the council of over £500,000, and also when it talks about the revised speed limit, have we any idea of how that's going to be enforced? Does this amount of money just literally reduce the speed with signage of 50 miles an hour, or does other infrastructure be put in place, such as, I don't know, cameras or whatever measures are being proposed, which aren't actually in this report? Just a little bit more detail in that area, if possible, Chair.
Chair, I haven't got that detail with me today, but would be happy to provide it to Councillor Holmes.
Councillor Bolton, please.
Yes, thank you. Whilst I welcome this report and obviously take on board the revised scheme for costs and funding, I would like to refer members to page 2, 3.1, the experiences on the A52. This does travel straight through Chaddesden Ward and does have implications on safety, and it has a knock-on effect, particularly on football match days when the parking around the area is exacerbated because of the safety on the A52 and the backlog of traffic. So I would like the officers to take that on board when dealing with the rest of this scheme, in that it does have repercussions on Chaddesden Ward, particularly when there are events on at the Pride Park Stadium, IPRO Stadium, and in fact the arena. But due to the planning permission that was granted, they should not have 2 events simultaneously. Thank you.
Any further questions or contributions from the floor? Okay, I'll put the recommendations to Cabinet. There are no recommendations from corporate scrutiny from this item. Again, please can I have a show of hands? Thank you. Okay, item 11, consulting on changes to council tax support scheme for 2017-18. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. The Council's got an existing council tax support scheme, but if it wishes to make any changes, those changes have to be made by the 31st of January 2017 in this case, and prior to that we have to consult on what those changes would be. The report proposes 22 possible areas for consideration, which are subject to consultation. The main thrust of those areas are around the minimum contribution level, the banding of council tax and which band would apply, the capital limits that are allowable, and in relation to non-dependents, in relation to housing benefit rules. There's a consultation timeline at Appendix 2 on page 8, which takes us from August through to October, and a decision won't be made until January Cabinet at the earliest, and actually that would have to be the latest as well, before the 31st of January deadline. So the report outlines the areas to be consulted upon and asks Cabinet for approval on those areas, and then delegates responsibility to officers to design the consultation pack and then bring back a report back to Cabinet before any decisions are made. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Martin. Corporate scrutiny did gave a number of recommendations to Council Cabinet on this agenda item, namely that mechanisms are put in place to ensure that changes to the Council tax support scheme do not have consequential effects which lead individuals and families to fall into hardship or below poverty lines. Secondly, officers are requested to look at schemes delivered by other local authorities and how changes have been implemented. And finally, those affected in supported accommodation should be specifically referenced and targeted as part of the consultation. Cabinet are happy to accept all these recommendations from corporate scrutiny. Are there any questions or comments from the floor? Councillor Skelton.
I would just like to know really, obviously it wasn't that long ago when some previous changes were made. It would be nice to know what sort of impact that has had on the families concerned. And what sort of, whether they've gone further into debt or other sorts of hardships. And I don't believe there's anything that actually, we haven't had any information on that, which I think would be useful, because that should inform what you can or should and shouldn't be doing as far as the period from now until next January is concerned.
Well, I'll bring Martin in on that in a second, but you'll probably remember when the council tax support scheme was initially introduced, what it did was replace the old council tax benefit scheme, which was administered directly by us. When the council tax support scheme was initially brought in, funding was provided to local authorities for that scheme, but top-sliced by a significant amount. We were left with the unenviable position of trying to administer the same scheme to the same number of people with far less money. So clearly there was an impact to the individuals who were formerly in receipt of council tax benefit but then were subsequently in receipt of council tax support. So yes, there will have been an impact, unfortunately. But Martin, do you want to fill in any more?
Yeah, just a bit of further background, Chair. When we started the scheme, we had over 13,000 people in the council tax support scheme. We've currently got 12,300, so it is reducing. So that's the first benefit, is that there are less people in this position. The second thing is the changes that we put through for 2016-17 weren't as complex as the ones that are being proposed here. It's early days, that only implemented from 1st of April, but what we need to do now is actually look at some statistics and see, well, what has happened in the first quarter, what's happened by the second quarter, and then we can make sure that they're shared with yourself, Councillor. It's early days at this point for the new scheme.
Councillor Grace, please.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure that you really are intending to consult, because I'm looking at consultation criteria, and clearly, to me, you're intending to confuse. Firstly, you're informing them that their minimum contribution is increasing, i.e. that their overall household income will be reduced. And so when you're asking the questions, surely they're going to reluctantly choose the lowest that's going to affect them. Why don't you tell them what you're planning to do, rather than ask a question you already know the answer to. You're also asking too many questions. So if your aim is to confuse, I'm certain you will get the answer that you want.
Thank you, Councillor Graves. I'm sorry if you feel confused by the questions that we're asking the public. Clearly, there are a number of questions placed in the consultation document, and that is exactly what it is, a consultation document, asking those questions of the public and the people who will be affected, who may not be affected, and any interested stakeholder. So if you would like further information on that, I'm sure an officer can sit down and go through that with you if you require. If there's no further comments or questions from the floor, I will move the recommendations as printed. Can I get agreement? You've already read them out, but the recommendations I've read them out. Subject to additions from yes, they will be added to the recommendations that are already in the Cabinet report, if that's okay with Cabinet colleagues. Can you agree to those and to the recommendations from scrutiny, please? Thank you. Okay, item 12, redevelopment of the former Britannia Court site. Ian?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Members will be familiar with the former Britannia Court flats, which were demolished back in 2012. This report seeks approval for us to go out for planning approval to develop or redevelop the site to provide 26 two-bedroom apartments for older people. It's proposed that the scheme would be held within the housing revenue account, but the apartments would be sold on a shared ownership basis, allowing purchasers to purchase up to 75% of the value of each apartment. It's proposed that the residents of this scheme would have access to the nearby Parkland View Extra Care scheme, which is 100 yards or so further down Duke Street, and we feel that that would help prevent any of the older residents in this scheme feeling isolated, as they'd have access to any activities or facilities at Parkland View. The scheme would also contribute to the Council's wider strategic objectives of providing older people with additional housing choices, enabling them to downsize and thereby combating any under-occupation of large family houses by just one or two older people being left in them. Thanks, Chair.
Corporate Scrutiny made a recommendation to Cabinet. They recommended that it was resolved to recommend to Council Cabinet that the options for maximising income through the possibilities of renting units at full market value, varying the costs of rental and more desirable units, and allowing contributions to the general fund are fully explored. Cabinet are happy to accept that recommendation and add that into the Cabinet paper. Are there any questions or comments from the floor, please? Councillor Graves.
Thank you. I'd just like to congratulate the Council on an excellent scheme. I think it's marvellous what's being suggested here, and I particularly like the fact that you're using developers to pay for some of the OCOR infrastructure, so I think that's well done.
Thank you, Councillor Graves. Can I move the recommendations as printed in the Cabinet report and the additional one? Yeah, thank you. Okay, item 13, Energy Framework Renewal Procurement. Councillor Rawson.
Thank you, Chair. As you'll see from the papers, Derby City Council's energy supply contracts are due for renewal in 2016. Both gas and electricity contracts require renewal from the 1st of October, and this report outlines the different options available to the Council. Energy markets are complex, and Cabinet Office and Government guidance outlines that wherever possible, all public sector organisation should use energy supply framework contracts. And these are set up to procure large volumes of single supply contracts at better rates than would be possible if partner organisations such as ourselves procured individually. Using a framework costs less than the cost of energy on the open market, removes the risk of exposure to direct market volatility in prices, and ensures the framework purchases the energy using inherent economies of scale, which we then benefit from. The report identifies Eastern Shire's purchasing organisation as the preferred regional consortium for renewal of both gas and electricity contracts based on the outcome of a procurement benchmarking exercise. So I therefore recommend the recommendations 2.1 to 2.3 contained in the report, Chair, to Cabinet colleagues.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the floor, please? Philip.
With the provider that the council were looking to go for the electricity SSE, not only according to the paper do they seem to be the best for value, they would also highly be more environmentally friendly than some of the others, with 37% of their energy being produced renewably compared to a national average of 19%. And I think something like that would be worthy of the public being aware of. And so I'm just wondering that if in the future with reports like this, whether not just the financial side, but also the environmental impact of the choice made could be released to the public.
Yep, that's a really good point, Mr. Youth Mayor. I'm sure we can incorporate that into future reports. Environment and renewable energy is, of course, a really important consideration. We have the hydro dam, of course, on the river, which is, I think, something this council should be very proud of having delivered. But if we can bring the environmental principle into our other procurement, then that's all to the good as well. So yes, I'm sure we can do that. Philip, thank you.
Excellent point, Philip. Any further questions or contributions, please? Okay, there were no recommendations from corporate scrutiny, so I'd like to move the recommendations as printed. Can I get a show of hands, please? Thank you very much. Item 14, Property Improvement Capital Works Programme, etc. Councillor Rawson.
Thank you, Chair. Council Cabinet approved in March of this year the Capital Works Programme, the Property Improvement Capital Works Programme for the year. However, there are an additional 4 projects that weren't included in that original approval, which now seeking approval to go forward. They're all listed there in the papers. 4.3 Mark Eaton Park. I think that's a good example of scrutiny being involved in cabinet decisions, because I understand scrutiny made some recommendations and in relation to that, and one of the scrutiny members met on site, and that's been incorporated into the scheme now. The additional disabled parking spaces, and I think the Allestree Ward councillors have also been involved in that. We've got the security measures at the Assembly Rooms and Chapel Street, which again is a positive, improving the customer experience at those car parks, and hopefully driving up our revenue as well, that we'll get in from those car parks. The leisure strategy, some improvements at the arena including in that, and an allocation for an outdoor cycle track, which is being looked at in further detail. And finally the Market Hall, some replacement works ahead of a bid which we're hoping to put into the lottery fund for that. Can I ask Cabinet colleagues for approval for those 4 additions? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lawson. Councillor Holmes, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, the Market Hall. Councillor Rawson's just mentioned there that hopefully future funding will be forthcoming via a bid process. Could I just ask, it's a great, we know it's a listed building, so obviously it requires investment from the council. Back in the day, I remember one of the first decisions that I had to sign off was significant investment in the roof, and here we are again, it's ongoing. It's not a criticism, it's just a reality. But can I ask, of the 650,000, would you describe this as a make-do? Is it a sticking plaster? You know, is this going to be a significant investment in the roof to secure its secure the facility in the medium term, in the short term? How would you describe that, just to give some background? And the other issue I'd like to just some clarity on, the 30,000 used, on this on page 4, with regards to resolving the ongoing IT issues at the arena. If I could just have a little bit of detail of what those issues are, just for detail, thanks.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Councillor Holmes. Yeah, a couple of weeks ago now, we've actually had a building conditions survey done of the Market Hall, which will give us a much better idea of all of the associated costs with the building, which is going to obviously assist us with putting together our bid to the lottery and other places. So this sum is our contribution, if you like, to that, and the information I have is that this will sort the problems certainly for the medium term, and put us in a good position to be able to demonstrate that we're contributing to the overall funding package for the Market Hall. Just on the IT, I don't know if one of the officers can perhaps answer that in a bit more detail.
Chair, if I could just say on the 30,000 for the arena, that is for IT issues. There was there was a scheme to actually bring the car parking barrier management into the arena. That's funded as part of that. It's quite an expensive piece of work because there are excavations that need to take place, and there's some work to do to improve the lighting system, which was known at the start of the project, but this is an ongoing process to actually improve the lighting. Facilities being used in a slightly different way to the way it was envisaged at design stage, and this improvement will help to better control the lighting for those different uses.
Thank you.
Is it in relation to the last point, Councillor Holmes?
Yeah,
I've had another indication.
Just to come back. Yeah, sorry. I think at the scrutiny board, I've just been told that it was spoken about the Wi-Fi signal and the phone signal rather than, is that a part of that, or is it just an omission?
Chair, yes, it was discussed about the phone system. There are two schemes. There's the phone system which is being looked at, but that is in early stages of development at this moment in time. So I didn't have up-to-date information yesterday at scrutiny, unfortunately. So the information I've given tonight is the up-to-date. It is for IT work relating to the safety barrier and to the lighting system. But there is further work that we need to investigate in terms of improvements to the phone system.
Councillor Graves, please.
Thank you. I've got two points to make. The first one is 4.6. I'd just like to understand why you felt it was necessary to give a discounted rate to the hotels. It seems at odds that these hotels have not provided any or enough car parking for their customers, and so it seems from a business perspective an ideal maximised revenue for the council. So I'd like to understand why that is and what the logic was, because you are therefore charging city residents more than you're charging visitors. The other is on 4.9. Again, from the scrutiny meeting, I heard that the council is still pursuing a cycle track across a bird sanctuary, and I'd just like to raise concern about that.
Yeah, just on that second point, you'll see from 4.9 there are a number of sites that are being looked at for the cycle track, and not necessarily the original one which was pursued a couple of years ago. terms of the parking services and the agreement with the hotels, I think the arrangement is to try and maximise the use of those particular car parks by generating additional revenue from customers who wouldn't otherwise have used those car parks and would have chosen elsewhere in the city centre to park. So the overall effect is to generate a surplus for the council, which we otherwise wouldn't have received. I don't know if there's officers want to add to that.
Chair, just to add to that, I think the rate that we're now offering to those hotels is comparable to the corporate season ticket arrangements that we have with larger employers in the city as well, and it just recognises the volume of trade that they bring into the car park.
Anything further, please? Okay, there were no recommendations from corporate scrutiny, so can I move the recommendations as printed? Yeah, show of hands. Thank you. Okay, item 15, special educational needs and disabilities top-up funding. As most of my cabinet colleagues will know, mainstream schools get allocated what's known as notional funding to support children with special educational needs and disabilities in their schools. This notional funding is fairly healthy in the city. It's about £22 million, I think, to each school. This Cabinet report seeks to introduce a new framework by which schools can make applications for top-ups to that funding if they need additional support for those young people. There was a pilot, as you'll see from the report here, which proved successful in administering that top-up support to those schools. And panels have been brought together to assess these applications. They have been made up of special heads, special educational needs coordinators and primary school heads who assess these applications from schools and deem whether it's appropriate for them to access additional DSG funding for those top-ups and the support that young people might require. This isn't something that's new. This has been done in many local authorities over many years. And to be honest, I think we should have probably done it a lot sooner than we have up until this point. The school-to-school challenge that's there provides a real robust framework to make applications for the DSG funding and speeds up access to that funding so we can bring down barriers to learning as soon as possible for these young people and keep them in the schools that they want to be in. And actually what we're finding is it increases and expedites the use of notional funding in schools that occasionally doesn't always get used to its full potential, we've seen anecdotally. So I think, again, this will reduce barriers to learning and increase the capabilities for young people to get the support that they need more quickly in our schools. I have to be very, very clear about this as well, that it will not at any point stop any statutory assessment for any young person in any of our schools. Even if they make an application for this additional funding, if their needs or circumstances change, they will still be able to make a statutory assessment application. So it's not removing the need for that, it's speeding up additional top-up funding that they may be able to access from DSG to give them the support that they need in mainstream school. So I endorse this paper and the recommendations. There were not any additional recommendations from corporate scrutiny on this. I'm happy to take questions or comments from the floor. Councillor Graves, please.
Thank you. I've read a story from Derby News that Danielle Lind, who's the chair of the Derby Parent Carer Forum, says that she was not consulted. I just wondered if you got any comments on that.
Yes, PCF reps have been invited to attend meetings and some were in attendance. The chair and vice chair of the PCF forum weren't at that meeting, but they did attend a meeting at the SEND commissioning group, which Frank McGee, our head of commissioning, chairs, and both the chair and vice chair provided feedback on the proposals at that meeting. So we were very happy to accept those proposals, and the proposals that they fed back were adopted as part of that scheme. So they have been consulted, and we've consulted very widely with parents and carers on this issue, and would do so again. Councillor Skelton, please.
I was rather surprised to hear that answer because I understand that they certainly were not invited to the meeting. The Parent Carer Forum was not invited. They were not. The chair, the outgoing chair was invited, but not in his role as chair of that forum, but in his role with the British Deaf Association. Right. There does seem a lack of information on this as to, well, which schools have been involved, to start with. Also, I would like to point out that Nottingham City do have a higher proportion of pupils in special needs school than Derby does, despite the fact that they have a similar system of top-up funding to school. And there is evidence from Nottingham also that parents are having to fight tooth and nail to actually get an EHCP assessment. I'm concerned that that may well be coming the norm within the city. Noting obviously what Councillor Russell has said, I hope indeed that that will prove to be true. Moving on, that you do actually, parents do have a right, as has been said, and this is a legal right to get their child assessed. And I do hope that they will be told this right at the beginning of the process so that they know that what their legal rights are. Some assessment, of course, will have to be made of those children, because unless you actually do some assessment, you don't know what their needs are. So this is not going to do away with the need for assessments. And quite right, EHCPs are taking a great deal of time in the city. We already know that conversions are taking longer than the 20 weeks, and some deadlines have already been missed. In 4.2, we read that the council spends more on high needs than its comparator authorities. That may well be because we actually rely more heavily on out-of-area placements, and we do not have enough placements, particularly within high-functioning, people with high-functioning ASD, than other authorities do. The Parent Carer Forum, as we've heard before, was not invited specifically. I've also heard from parents who say that they were present at the Equality Impact Assessment, and they were not happy with what went on in the meeting, despite the fact that in this report it says they were. The consultation on this should have been front-loaded, as I alluded to earlier in the item on adult services, i.e. prior to the development of this model. Parents have not had an input right at the beginning in the development of this model. And from these paperwork, we're still unclear exactly what the model is. And we also will want to know what criteria did you actually use to assess this pilot as a success? And why isn't it detailed in the report here? And also, how is funding to be allocated to these locality clusters? I'm concerned that we may well end up with an unfair situation where a child with, for example, ASD in a Normanton school or other inner city school may well be getting more money than the same child in a leafy suburb school, which just cannot be right because their needs, if they're two identical children, will be identical. In the past couple of years, I must say I have had more casework on this issue than in the previous years, 16 years prior to that of being a councillor. and as Councillor Russell admitted to start with, this should have been implemented a long time ago. In the past couple of years, there have been a number of children. In fact, one local journalist believes there's at least 20 who have fallen through the cracks when the removal of top-up funding was implemented. These children have not, or have the placements they had within mainstream special units or just within mainstream, have broken down. They've not been allocated other places. There aren't any special school places because they're all full, and children have been denied placements outside of the city. So these children are actually at the moment at home, not in education. And although they might technically be on the roll of a school. And I want to know, what are you going to do for these children? Because these are the ones in this period of 2 or so years have been seriously damaged, both emotionally, and they're totally traumatised. Their needs have actually gone up because of the bad experience they've gone through in not having the amount of support that their condition required. I personally know of a child who now cannot be got into a school. She won't even now walk. She has to be pushed around in a pushchair and insists on wearing a blanket over her head to shut out the outside world. Now, prior to this child spoke, walked. You know, this is the reality of what we're dealing with, and I do want to see something brought forward by the council to deal with the situation that these children, maybe 20, 30 children, are in.
Thank you for your contribution, Councillor Skelton. There was clearly a lot in there. I'll try and respond to the points that you made, but if I miss anything, please do speak to me again afterwards. The number of schools that were in the pilot was 12. I can't give you the names of the schools off the top of my head, but we can provide that to you afterwards. You talked a lot about statutory assessments and the need for conversion plans, etc. I couldn't have been any clearer at the start of my contribution that there will be no limit on statutory assessments for children and young people in this city. If a child needs a statutory assessment, they will go through that process. This framework, this pilot and the extension of this pilot is not an attempt to limit that. Now, your assessment of the funding table is probably fairly accurate, to be honest. I think that historically it has been the school's way to access funding quicker because perhaps these mechanisms haven't been in place to instantly apply for a statutory assessment when perhaps that may have been needed in some cases but perhaps not. And I think this will allow them to keep those children in school that may have slight additional needs but can flourish in a mainstream school, but just with that additional support. So I think this mechanism will now provide that avenue for that to happen. Clearly, there are issues in converting former statements to CH plans. There's been no denial of that problem. It's not a secret that the huge cuts in 2010 to that team at that point created massive problems, and really we're still feeling the reverberations of those cuts from those years ago now. And the young people who need those plans updating and sorting out need that to happen regardless. It's not an excuse, it's just the reality. I am confident that the team that is now in place, along with myself, understand the situation and have taken active and productive steps to improve the situation. We're not there yet. There's always work to be done, but we have taken those steps to improve that situation. I'm confident of that. You talked about the criteria that was used. I'll get one of the officers happily to provide you a detailed briefing on that as well. And Councillor Skelton, in particular to the 20 or so young people that you mentioned, I'd be really keen to hear any specifics you've got that you can share with me, obviously subject to data protection, on those cases, so we can look into them specifically, because clearly we don't want any young person to fall through the cracks in this city. We will do the utmost that we can to protect any child, and that goes for your question about locality provision as well. A child in Normanton having special educational needs is no different to a child in Allestree having special educational needs, and the support we should provide for both those children should be equal and equitable, and no one is suggesting otherwise. Are there any further questions or contributions from the floor, please? Okay, there were no recommendations from corporate scrutiny, so I'd like to move the recommendations as printed. Have a show of hands, please. Okay, item 16, revenue outturn. Martin, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is revenue outturn for 2015-16. The main headlines are in paragraph 1.4 on the first page. The first headline is a 2.2 million underspend on the general fund revenue budget, which is just under 1%. To put that in context, that's in relation to the net budget of £225 million. But as a complex organisation, Derby City Council, from a revenue perspective, is nearly a £1 billion organisation. We do target that we don't overspend. It would be remiss of us as an organisation to overspend. Coming in on balance would be absolutely fine, but if you look in the details of the report, there are a number of reasons why we've ended up in this outturn position, most of which couldn't have been predicted at the time of setting the budget. So we've had a big underspend in adult services as our demand management strategies have reduced the costs. We've had increased costs, significant increased costs in looked after children as they've arisen during the year. We've overachieved in some income areas in year that weren't predicted at the start of the year. We've made some savings in treasury management as we've managed to get some better increases on our investments. Better increases actually on our investments than we've done the previous year, even though rates have been reducing. We've managed to increase our income from housing benefit over recovery payments, and we've had some increased pressures in our insurance services. So there's a number of things that happened during the year that have arisen in that final outturn position. In terms of that, there is a proposal in paragraph 5.2 of what we would do with that 2.2 million. There are 5 areas there that total 2 million, with the balance going into budget risk. 5.3 in the report identifies why we would do that. So these are strategic areas. There's a report later on in the private part of this agenda around insurance valuations and the need to put some money in to get that right. There's a proposal that we enhance some of our economic growth activity areas, in particular our work with the D2N2 and the local enterprise partnership. There's a top-up to the property rationalisation reserve, so there are a number of things we need to do with our property stock in order to bring them to a position where we can maximise those or get out of those properties in order to deliver the MTFP savings we've got in those areas. There's a top-up to ensure the actual insurance reserve because our insurance costs are rising as a result of our risk position with our insurer. And the final one is a technical proposal that we, at the end of the year, we don't exactly know whether we've got absolutely everything covered in our final accounts, and there may be things that drift over between the 2 financial years, and we set aside an amount just to deal with those aspects. So that's on the revenue account. On the HRA, there's an underspend of around £4 million. Part of that was anticipated in the HRA plan at the start of the year. There has been an increase in rental income, which is a positive for us, and as a consequence of that, the bad debt provision has reduced because we're getting more income. All that goes into the HRA account, which is ring-fenced account to use for HRA purposes in future years. On the collection fund, we've had a net surplus. That net surplus is shared with our preceptors, the fire and the police authorities. For Derby City Council, our element of that is a 1.8 million benefit on council tax through increased levels of billing and recovery, and on business rates it's been a net reduction of 0.7 of a million because we've had to increase our appeals provision because there is a lot of people, a lot of businesses out there who are appealing against their business rates bills. The net position of that is around £1 million, and that will feature in the 2017-18 MTFP. The final element, Chair, is on dedicated school grants. They have underspent by 2.4 million. That takes DSG balances to 6.8 million. 3.4 million that had already been agreed to be committed, 2.1 of which is to send to the report we've just been talking about. So that's commitments that the schools have proposed out of their DSG balances. And school balances stand at around £10.5 million for the end of the financial year. Recommendations are in the report, Chair. I'll take any questions.
Councillor Holmes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wholeheartedly agree with the Scrutiny Board's recommendations to Cabinet. I agree that this should have been more transparent. I think I would focus on the lack of detail in terms of what other options were considered leading to the list here. On the report, the detail is totally lacking. Martin has put some flesh to the bones in his report to you, Chair, but still, I think there's a distinct lack of options that were considered and detail behind that has resulted in officers, I assume, putting forward their wish list, if you like, on the underspend. I think what I'm getting to here is, if I was a member of the public, to ask you, Chair, or any of the administration's cabinet or councillors, they would see this as £2 million underspend from the budget, despite the budget process being a tough one, and many debates about the lack of funding for Citizens Advice Bureau, Moorway Swimming Pool, etc., etc. So we've seen those cuts, and yet here we are with an underspend of £2 million from the revenue budget. So it'd be interesting to see what your answer would be to a member of the public that quite look at this and say, well, frontline services in my area or in the city have been cut, and yet you have £2 million that you suddenly can use for other things. Those other things aren't really defined, and I think that's an issue. It needs clarity.
Okay, Chair, thank you. In relation to the £2 million underspend, and I understand Councillor Holmes's position on this. In setting the budget, we have to set a permanent position. We have to set what it's going to be for the medium term and into the future. There has been an underspend of 2.2 million on the revenue budget. Yes, we can take that 2.2 million pounds, but it can't be used to offset permanent pressures that we've got on a permanent basis. So there is a difference between the setting of the budget at that point in time and the outturned position. Yes, 2.2 million could be used for a number of things. And yes, there could be a wish list as long as our own. We could spend this 2.2 million. You could ask the public, you could ask members, you could ask the Cabinet. We could spend it 20, 30, 40 times over, absolutely. The recommendations or the proposals in this report that we're asking Cabinet to approve are strategic decisions that have come from management that say there are critical things that we need to deliver. We need to deliver things around the property rationalisation, otherwise we won't hit the MTFP. We need to address insurance valuations because it's a critical issue that's being picked up by external auditors. So there are a number of things that would come to us to say we would like X, Y and Z to be delivered, but these are the strategic things that we are proposing to members to say they are the critical things that we need to be addressing at this time.
Chair, if I can just come in on the back of that. I understand the point that Councillor Holmes is making about could this effectively have deferred savings. I think the other thing you need to take into account if you're explaining it to the public is that we are effectively on a journey through a period of time around a decreasing level of funding from government. And what you could argue here is that we have overachieved our saving level in this first year. However, we still have £45 million to save. So are we £2 million underspent, or have we just got £43 million to save? So the reality is that it's not that we're at a standstill position where our funding level is fixed and we have a £2 million underspend, in which case I think your point would be right. But actually our funding level in future years is going down and down and down. So what we have to do is try and forecast on both income and expenditure how we will get that gradient to match the gradient that's been set for us in terms of the reductions in our grant level. We've slightly overachieved, and we are effectively therefore saving slightly ahead of the schedule that we'd set. And therefore you see that in the outturn, which is a single day and a point in time that says this is the amount of saving you made at that point. Going forward though, we still have huge amounts of savings to make, and that's why we've had to take very difficult decisions at a point in time to reduce services or end services that we couldn't keep them going because that level of money won't stay static, and therefore they would have to go down, and they'd have to go down over a much shorter time period, and we have to do it in a planned way. And that's the explanation I would give. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Graves.
Thank you. It's interesting that officers are making the political arguments here this evening. On this particular issue about the 2.2 million underspend, I actually disagree with the overview and scrutiny recommendation. I don't think that's what we decided. Because there was a lot of discussion at that meeting. Even members from the Labour Party were querying in fact they termed it as free money, and they wanted to spend it on other things. The majority of them wanted to spend it on other things, but other people didn't. But everybody had their own view as to where it should be spent. And actually it comes back to Councillor Holmes's observations, and that is that there's no transparency. It seems to have just slipped into this cabinet report. This is what the officers particularly want to do, clearly because they've made the point, and councillors just have to accept what's being said. Well, as far as I can see, there are a lot of councillors, including people from your own party, that are unhappy with this decision. I do have other points to make. Can I come back once you've discussed that, or would you like me to say carry on? Carry on, okay. Looking at the report, 6.9 in the Communities and Place Directorate, I'm a little concerned that that you've overachieved on fines. I mean, that's quite a statement, that is. It's as if the aim is to achieve more income rather than create a free-flowing city. I did ask on 6.11 what the additional waste tonnages came from. If somebody could answer that, I would appreciate it. I'm also concerned on 6.12 because you made a statement there, basically that you've not made an agreement with the athletics club, and that is it. So I'm very concerned about what the future of the athletics in the city is going to be, if anybody can make a comment on that. I'm also concerned, and I think it was raised by Martin, that there's the trend of school balances being increased by over £2 million. I think it's worrying when we have a time of teaching assistants where their income has been cut. I think it'd be very interesting. The public would like to know why that has occurred. Thank you.
Chair, in relation to the first point, I think Tim will probably want to come in on the fines and the other details in relation to communities and place. In terms of the transparency, and Councillor Graves has raised that again as was recommended by the board. There was a debate at scrutiny last night about which proposal should go forward, should there be alternatives to these things, and like I say, that list could have gone on and on all night in terms of what would be provided. Again, I'll refer back to there are strategic issues that the council need to address, and that's why these are on the page, these 5 are on the page, because they're the most critical ones that allow us to be sustainable, get our budget straight and deal with the major impacts. To allow a free flow list I'm not convinced it would achieve a great deal, because a number of those things would not be able to be delivered. That's my view on that one, Chair. If Tim wants to come in on the others.
Okay, Chair. Specifically on the fines that have been brought in by some of the changes that we've made, the purpose of introducing these is to change motorist behaviour so that we do have a better flow of traffic through the city, and in particular in the use of bus lanes and bus stops. And we make an estimate of what income that might be received from that. And I think we've been slightly disappointed it's taken motorists a little while longer to change their behaviour than we anticipated. But those fines have now peaked and people are changing their behaviour, and therefore the traffic should flow more smoothly. Would you like me to address the issue about the waste tonnages as well? This is simply an increase in the amount of waste that domestic properties are putting out. We believe that it reflects the country slowly coming out of recession, and is entirely consistent with the figures in other authorities across the country.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just make a comment about the DSG. The DSG reserves are actually very, very small. And as the report says, we've kept a prudent 1.5% in reserve. There are many other authorities that have hundreds of thousands and hundreds of millions, sorry, in their DSG reserves. The reality is we do need some reserves, particularly in relation to the challenge in relation to SEN, which we talked about earlier. And we just need to be prudent in terms of keeping some of the reserves in the balance for other pressures that may arise in the year.
Councillor Rawson.
Thank you, Chair. Just in response to the point about the athletics, we do have a very good relationship with the athletics club in the city. We've a couple of years ago invested quite a significant amount in terms of improving the athletics track at Moorways. So that does remain a high priority for us, and we will continue to work closely with them to make sure that people in Derby have the opportunity of accessing that service. In terms of the underspend, just to reiterate, really, Councillor Holmes and Councillor Graves, the points you make would be correct if we were in the position of having a standstill budget or an improving position over the coming years, but we don't. The government is cutting our grants year on year on year. So the reality of the outturn position, all it really means is that we have £2 million less to save in future years. And whilst we would all love to be able to allocate that for projects and things that we as councillors all come into local government to do, to improve services and to provide more from our residents, the reality is, unfortunately, because of the years of cuts that we've got to come, that just isn't possible. So that's the reality of the position, Councillor Holmes and Councillor Graves, just to clarify that for you.
Thank you. Councillor Holmes, please.
Thank you, Chair. On 6.9, it talks about the overachieving on fines and fees by 0.635 million. Could I ask, I'm assuming that's financial year 15-16, and also what is the total, if that's the overachievement, what is the total revenue from fines and fees? I'd also be very interested to actually see at some point the evidence of the benefits of introducing some of the schemes in terms of traffic enforcement and bus lane enforcement. You talk about increased or better traffic flows. We had debates in previous council meetings about the reasons for the implementation of these particular schemes, and it seemed to be a safety issue, then it wasn't a safety issue, then it was about the buses running on time, and then it was something else. And you know, our argument's always been that there is a significant element of revenue generation from these schemes. So if there is evidence of better traffic flows, for example, I would like to see it. Thank you.
Can any officer answer those specific points, please?
Chair, I don't have the total figures in terms of the income with me, but obviously we can provide that to Councillor Holmes.
Okay. Is that all right, Matthew? Okay. Any further comments or contributions? Okay, there has been a recommendation from Overview and Scrutiny from last night. It reads, the board resolved to recommend to Council Cabinet that future information on underspend think that should be underspends, should be more transparent, the term carry forward was misleading, and that further detail on why selected elements of the budget require top-ups and how these are prioritised should be included in reports, as well as the inclusion of requests that were put forward but did not receive additional funds. We took advice from officers earlier today, and I'll bring Martin Marples in to repeat his advice. Just that there's no intention to not share the information that members are asking for, but that for the officers to list every single request for carry forwards would be really, really burdensome. But I'll let Martin explain that.
Thank you, Chair. Taking this recommendation in parts should be more transparent. The word carry forward was misleading, and I accept that, because carry forward is typically something that's moves from one year to another, and in this respect it's being used for different things. So terminology, we will make sure that that's dealt with in future. Further details, there are details in the report in paragraph 5.3. Those details could be clearer. It could have talked about the more strategic approach, so we will make sure that that is done in future. The bit that I'm uncertain of is whether every request that would come, of which there may be many, and rejected by Cabinet members before they even get, like anything that happens, there are debates and things get rejected before proposals are put in front of Cabinet. And before Cabinet makes such decisions, to have a full list of everything and why it was rejected would not make financial sense to me, or increase the level of transparency that we'd be showing as a council.
So I think on that basis, it's quite clear that any member can ask for this information from officers. The only thing including it in a report of this nature, you would end up with reams and reams and reams of paper, because there could be multiple requests in one financial year for these carry forwards, or deference of budget in that sense. So in that vein, Cabinet won't be accepting that recommendation, but reiterate the point that that information is available to members if they want to have it, and can speak to the monetary Section 151 officer about those requests whenever they like, really. So I'd like to move the recommendations as printed in the report, please. Can I get a show of hands? Thank you. Capital outturn, item 17, that's Martin again, please.
Thank you, Chair. The capital outturn for 2015-16 reflects a 70.2 million spend against the latest approved budget of 76.5 million. It's a variance of 6.3, which is detailed in the appendices, and it's narrated on page 5 in paragraph 5.5. So we've had some schemes that are truly slipped from 15-16 through into future years. We've had some schemes that were due to start in 16-17 and they've come forward into 15-16. We've had some schemes that have either under or overspent, so those schemes are dealt with and the outturn position is managed there. And then we've had some additional funding and some additional schemes which are added to the scheme and added to the programme and financed in year. The main reasons are in the report. We also do a performance section, which is section 7 of the report, starting on page 11. So we have a baseline position at Q2, and then we look at what the position is at the end of the year. There are some significant variances in there. The details are in the report. In particular, there are a number of high-level areas, high-profile schemes, our City, our River being one, and the progress we're making on that, and the planning applications we have to get through, and the planning approvals, and the dealing with developers. Another high-profile one is Infinity Park Derby, and in relation to the works, we've had some delays in there. People will be aware of that around the statutory undertakers. We had a contingency budget of £1 million, which wasn't used by the end of the year, and that's reflected in the final outturn as well. So recommendations are to note the capital outturn, Chair, and to approve the movements recommendations at 2.1, 2.5. I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Martin. Are there any questions or contributions from the floor, please? No, there are no additional recommendations from scrutiny, so I'll move the recommendations as printed. Agreed? Thank you. Item 18, Treasury Management Annual Report. That's Martin again, please.
Thank you, Chair. Treasury Management Annual Report, again for 15-16, a net underspend of just under £1 million. We've reviewed the way we deal with our debt and changed some of the asset life, spreading the costs over a longer period. We've also, as I mentioned earlier, had higher than anticipated investment interest that we've earned over the year, even though the rates have been reducing. We have used our cash balances rather than borrowing, which is the strategy, which is in our strategy, and it's something that is advised by our Treasury advisors all in close. There's no point, if we don't need to borrow money, we don't borrow it at this stage. Otherwise, I'm borrowing money at a higher rate and then investing it at a lower rate. We will invest, so we will borrow the funds when the time is required. The amount of borrowing that is in the general funds or in the revenue account in 15-16 is reducing, so it's lower than it was in 2014-15. So we're driving down borrowing percentages in terms of the overall liability on the revenue budget in each year. There are a number of limits and rules within which I need to abide, and all of those have been adhered to within the financial year, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Are there any questions or contributions from the floor, please? Okay. I put to the meeting the recommendations as printed. Can I have agreement, please? Thank you. Item 19, Martin again.
Thank you, Chair. Regular contract and financial procedure matters. There are a number of items in this report, and then I'll take the addendum as well, which is the one you mentioned earlier. So in terms of this, it's about accepting a grant from Southern Derbyshire CCG around supporting mental health in children and young people. It's called Futures in Mind. The second proposal is to enter a joint agreement with the University of Derby, who are leading a programme on targeting inactivity. We have to put a contribution into this. That contribution is our officer time that we've already got set in the budget in our community leisure service. There are some changes to the capital programme. We're in 2016-17 now, so it's some early changes in the capital programme. There are a number of areas where we are reliant on offering financial support to businesses, and that might not arise as quickly as we would like. So there are some delays in that, and there are some schemes where we are dependent on external funding. And if that doesn't arise, we have to reflect the reprofiling of such schemes. There's a couple in there. Infinity Park Derby is another one. The Derby Enterprise Growth Fund and the City Living Scheme, where we're relying on people coming forward to get our support. The next item is about the Local Growth Fund. There was Local Growth Fund Round 1, where we had been allocated some money from the LEP. One of those proposals in there was around a connected cycle city and placemaking, which didn't get through the net, if you like, at the Local Enterprise Partnership. They have asked us to reconsider where we'd put that. Our proposal is to put that into the City Centre Master Plan, in particular the Beckett Well area. The next one is about Local Growth Fund Round 3, so this is another bidding round. These things come quick and fast, and we have to respond to them relatively quickly. And we're asking for permission to submit outline bids to these schemes. Obviously, if that goes to a further stage, we'll have to come back to Cabinet to finalise the details. The final one in this main report is the temporary agency worker contract. We've got a contract existing. We've been trying to re-tender that contract and found a few difficulties, and we want to take some more time to make sure we get that right. So we're asking for a waiver to extend that for a 6-month period. The addendum is in relation to further bids to, just trying to find it again, to D2N2, to the LEP again, in the major transport, local major transport schemes. 2 schemes really. One is around improvements on the A52, and another one is about a new junction on the A50. The reason we brought this as an addendum is the outline bids have to be in by the 17th of July, so we needed to get approval from Cabinet tonight in order to move that on, Chair. Thank you.
Any questions or contributions, please? Councillor Holmes.
Just a quick one, Chair. On the temporary agency worker contract, I don't have the previous Cabinet report in front of me, but can you just clarify? I'm trying to remember now exactly what it said, but it suggested, correct me if I'm wrong, that the matrix being used was costing more than it should do, and it identified significant savings could be made in this area in terms of the process that's being used or the contract that's that the council have. Is that still the case? Is the changes that we're trying to put into place with regards to the current contract or changing it or change a system going to provide the council with a saving?
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Is there an officer that would like to respond to this?
Can we do that, Chair?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the matrix contract is in the region of £5 million a year. There are a number of areas where we use agency workers, predominantly around street pride and street cleansing areas and in social care. So there are a couple of the big areas. There are a number of other areas. The biggest spend within the £5 million is actually paying for the individuals. It's their pay. It's what we have to pay for them. There is a marginal markup in terms of the agency, the vendor that we use. So we've looked at this. There will be potentially some savings, but they're only marginal around the actual contract saving. The only way to make actual savings around this area is to have less. So it's a demand management issue that needs to be addressed, not necessarily the contracting issue in terms of making savings around this one. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Eldrick, please.
Just to briefly add to what Martin said, that there is, as part of launching the employment charter that the Derby City Council Employment Charter that we launched in May 2015, one of the aspects of that is looking at our usage of agency workers and trying to reduce that. And that work is ongoing. So although, as Martin said, that's part, so we have an employee commission which is made up of, chaired by myself and made up of union representatives and officers who are constantly looking at these issues of workforce planning and our use of agency workers and how we can reduce that, not only to achieve savings, yes, but also to increase the number of the level of permanent employment, because that's the situation we want to be in. We want to have as high a level of permanent employment within our workforce as possible. So hopefully to achieve both of those things.
Thank you. Councillor Rawson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to draw attention to items 7 and 8, the Local Growth Fund. As Cabinet will be aware that as government cuts our budget year on year, we are becoming more dependent on external funding for our regeneration projects. But that's not limiting our ambition for the city. We've got the city centre master plan coming to full council next week, and to back that up, we're being very proactive in applying for whatever external funding we can identify to be able to deliver on the priorities in the city centre. So obviously up there is Duckworth Square, which is, if you ask any member of the public in Derby, is probably number one on the list of their ideas for what areas of the city that need an intervention. The market has failed to deliver anything on there for 15 years, probably more, so it's really positive that we as a City Council are intervening and putting together a bid to be able to regenerate that whole area. The new performance venue to replace the assembly rooms is also obviously a big priority for us, and we're going into Local Growth Fund round 3 to bid for that funding towards that. And you can see we're also wanting to support the Derby Silk Mill, the Museums Trust, for their plans for transforming the Silk Mill to the Museum of Making. The Castle Ward Urban Village is very successful, creating a new urban community between the city centre and the railway station, so we want to support that and make sure that continues. And the Connect Derby office schemes, many cabinet members will know about that particular project, which is hugely successful and creating hundreds of jobs in the city, supporting local businesses, and we want to expand that particular project, so that as those companies grow that are in places like Friargate Studios and over the road at Riverside Chambers and so on, as they grow, we can provide a bigger office accommodation for them to expand into. Despite the restrictions that we have with our funding internally, I just want to make Cabinet aware that we are being extremely proactive in trying to find solutions and continue to regenerate Derby and create jobs despite all of those difficulties that we face.
Yeah, some good news there, Martin. Thanks for that. Okay, there are no recommendations from scrutiny on this. Can I move the recommendations as printed, please? Are they agreed? Yep. Thank you. I'm not on. Item 20, performance monitoring, year-end results. Chief Exec, please.
Thank you, Chair. Before members is the report setting out the performance against our indicators. This is particularly against the basket of indicators that we have as key performance measures. I know it's already been in the press around the performance level of 50%, and there's been some questions around that, but I think it's important to put it into context. Overall, across all of the council indicators, our actual performance level is 65% have been met or exceeded, so it's significantly higher. But within the priority basket that we've looked at, that reflects the key areas that the council wants to make improvement in. And so it's not only about the actual target itself, it's about where you set that target at. And one of the things we're trying to do in terms of moving forward is be very clear about the aspiration for improvement in the council. We could set targets at a level that would mean that we would meet 100% of them. That doesn't drive improvement, it doesn't drive a level of increased offer to residents, it doesn't move the city forward. So we've set aspirational targets. So it's inevitable that we will miss a number of them. We may get very near to them, but we may not exceed them. So there is something in this in the context around being clear about how much stretch are you trying to achieve, how much improvement are you trying to achieve. And when you compare that from the previous year, we've improved our position in over 52% of our targets. That compared to the previous rate of improvement of 45%. So actually our improvement direction, our ability to get more out of less is actually improving. We are setting our targets higher, so we have an overall position which may appear on first glance to be not as impressive as we were historically, but when you put that into the basket of all indicators and you compare it to the level of improvement, actually the council is delivering a very good performance. The other issue to look at there is about, and it leads into the next report as well, is about the balance of the scorecard. This is a selection, a basket of indicators, and that does change year to year. So in this particular example that you're looking at here, there is a basket of 42 indicators. Historically, there was a basket of 67. So when you reduce the number of indicators you are looking at, if there is a difference and you miss one, that has a bigger proportional impact on your percentage achieved. And therefore, there's a number of contextual issues that need to surround this report. Overall, there are lots of good news items in here where we've had good achievement. I'm pleased to report to members that we are getting a better level of improvement, which is again a key direction of travel item that we need to be clear about. However, I would have preferred the number to be higher, and we will continue to strive to make sure that we try to achieve those aspirational targets and move that number up to as high a level as possible. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Are there any comments or questions from the floor, please?
I hope you would not mind me focusing on one of the areas in particular on the scorecard. For this year, the Youth Council within Derby City Council is focusing its theme on homelessness. And it's a theme which, having spent 2 years volunteering in a homeless shelter, I know somewhat the effect it has on people. And so in the scorecard it says that this service is, there's now 377 homeless people accepted within the city. And it says within the report that in the future years, due to elimination of HRS funding, it means there will be less opportunity of preventing homelessness, and it's expecting even more higher acceptances in future years. And so I'm just wondering what progress is being made maybe with working with external organisations or third sector organisations to try and tackle what is quite a serious problem, I guess, within the city?
Yes, absolutely. I think I'd agree with everything that you said. But of course, this is about target setting and management performance against that target. The answer in the context of this report would be we will need to set the target appropriate to the level of demand that we would think we will have and the level of control that we'll have in terms of the resources available to manage homelessness. Unfortunately, that is unlikely to be as high as it is at the present time going forward. What we're trying to do through a programme called Delivering Differently is to look at all of the things you're talking about. Is there a way that we can deliver more service at a lower cost by using external partners? And that absolutely is the key driver of what we're trying to do. So we will be aiming to reduce homelessness as far as we possibly can, but within the limits of the resources and the partnership arrangements that we can make.
Councillor Holmes.
Just a quick question, please, Chair. In terms of children in care per 10,000 population under the age of 18, could you just remind me, if an officer knows or a cabinet member knows, how does Derby compare in terms of its current figures with other neighbouring authorities or like-for-like authorities?
We are about average, maybe just slightly higher, but not very much higher than our family of authorities and the national.
I can inform Councillor Holmes that this week's figures for children in care were 451. And obviously we are working proactively to increase foster carers in the city and also ensure that children who are due to be adopted do so as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Any further questions or contributions, please? Corporate scrutiny considered items 20 and 21 together, and one recommendation was born out of that. I think it refers more to the council scorecard than this item, so I'll take it at item 21 if that's all right. Item 21, please, Chief Exec.
Thank you, Chair. We talked about this council scorecard for last year, and what members have in front of them is the proposal for the new municipal year in terms of the basket of measures that we intend to look at. What has been selected in front of you is a move much more to a statutory focus. We've talked particularly about how we're having to target our resources over future years, and this is really reflecting that move. So you will see the changes in paragraph 5.2, which shows where we're moving. We're using the same approach that we did last year because we want to be able to compare like with like, but some of the indicators move in and some of them move out to reflect the focus of the council plan. So it's there for members to consider in terms of the changes, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions or contributions, please? Okay, the recommendation from Corporate Scrutiny was that Council Cabinet was recommended to Council Cabinet that any changes to targets in the Council scorecard at the end of Q1 are recorded for transparency. Council Cabinet are happy to accept that recommendation and insert it into the report. So on that basis, can I ask for agreement from Cabinet as amended, please? Thank you. Item 22 is the exclusion of the press and public. To consider a resolution to exclude the press and public during consideration of the following item. That under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following item on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3, part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Thank you all very much for your attendance.